Trapped in a world of endless shadows, Arlo Vance spent his nights guarding a lonely toll booth, completely consumed by the grief of losing his sister. But his fragile reality shattered into a million pieces the moment his vintage radio picked up a forbidden frequency, 104.7 FM, an urban legend that officially did not exist. Every single night at precisely midnight, a chilling, automated voice broadcasted the names of the departed. But everything changed when the static spoke a living name, Maya Lin, the vibrant girl he had just seen hours before. With the countdown ticking toward a fateful Friday midnight, Arlo and Maya unraveled a cosmic mystery hidden inside an abandoned clock tower, forcing them to choose between trusting logic or following their hearts. In a thrilling, emotional climax, Arlo risked the fate of the entire town, slamming a mysterious golden pocket watch into the mechanical gears of destiny to rewrite her fate in a blinding flash of light. This is a breathtaking journey of love, survival, and the courage to transform a monument of fear into a beautiful symphony of life that you absolutely cannot miss. Before we dive into this incredible story, we would love to know more about our amazing listeners. Which beautiful city are you watching from today? Please drop the name of your hometown in the comment section below so we can all get to know each other much closer. Also, if you want to see how this haunting mystery unfolds, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single heartwarming episode. The rain over Whispering Pines always sounded like a soft collective sigh, washing over the lonely asphalt where Arlo Vance spent his nights. At 23, Arlo felt like a ghost haunting his own life, a boy woven out of shadows and unspoken grief. Ever since his older sister Clara vanished into the ether a year ago, leaving behind nothing but an empty bedroom and a heavy, suffocating silence in their family home, Arlo had stopped looking at the sunrise. Instead, he chose the isolation of the graveyard shift at the eastern toll booth, a glass cage surrounded by mist and towering pines. To the few drivers who passed by, he was just a polite, pale face handing back change. But to Arlo, this booth was his sanctuary, the only place where his internal emptiness matched the desolation of the outside world. He lived his life in a fragile, repetitive loop, measured entirely by the ticking hands of the dashboard clock. As the night deepened and the occasional headlights dwindled into nothingness, Arlo's hand would automatically drift toward the dial of his vintage, scratched-up transistor radio. The town knew the local frequencies well, but Arlo always tuned his dial to a forbidden space, 104.7 FM. On any map or official broadcasting registry, this station simply did not exist. It was nothing but a dead zone of crackling white noise to anyone else who stumbled upon it. But as the clock crept closer to midnight, the heavy static would begin to hum with a strange magnetic warmth. Arlo sat perfectly still, his breath catching in his throat, his fingers trembling slightly against the steering wheel of his thoughts. He knew what was coming. Every single night, precisely at midnight, a serene, hauntingly beautiful automated voice would cut through the static to read a list of names, the names of the people who had departed this world at that exact minute. It was a beautiful, tragic monument built out of audio waves. Arlo listened with a heart-wrenching conflict tearing at his chest. He was completely terrified to hear Clara's name spoken into the cold air, yet he was deeply desperate for it, knowing that hearing her name on the midnight broadcast would finally give him the closure he needed to stop waiting for a girl who was never coming home. The echoes of those phantom names lingered long after the radio returned to its usual hum of empty static, leaving Arlo alone with the rhythmic drumming of raindrops against his glass sanctuary. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple, he drove home to a house that felt less like a home and more like a museum of preserved sadness. His mother was already in the kitchen, her hands moving mechanically as she brewed coffee, her eyes reflecting the same hollow ache that Arlo carried in his chest. She She tried to spark a conversation, asking about his night with a fragile, hopeful smile, but Arlo only managed a polite nod before slipping away to the quiet safety of his bedroom. He felt completely detached from the waking world, like a diver observing life from beneath miles of heavy, dark water. The townspeople of Whispering Pines dismissed the mysterious frequency as nothing more than a silly urban legend born out of small-town boredom, a glitch in old frequencies that people imagined out of thin air. To Arlo, however, those midnight broadcasts were the only anchor keeping him grounded to reality. He convinced himself that his sleepless vigilance was a sacred duty. If he stopped tuning in, the souls of the forgotten would vanish entirely into the dark, leaving no trace behind. He lay awake for hours, watching dust motes dance in the pale morning light, trapped in a self-imposed prison of loyalty to the sister who had left him behind. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a heavy weight, counting down the agonizingly long hours until the sun would set again, allowing him to return to the only place where his grief felt understood. This torturous daytime waiting game finally drove Arlo out of his bed late that afternoon, his footsteps dragging him instinctively toward Clara's untouched bedroom. The space still smelled faintly of lavender and vanilla, a cruel contrast to the dust gathering on her sketchbooks and the colorful paintings lining the walls. As he ran his fingers along the edge of her wooden desk, his knuckles brushed against something metallic and unfamiliar, hidden beneath a stack of old art papers. It was an intricately engraved golden pocket watch, its surface etched with delicate patterns of winding ivy and celestial stars that seemed to catch the dying sunlight. When he pressed the latch, the cover snapped open to reveal a frozen face. The slender mechanical hands were locked perfectly, unmoving at exactly 12 o'clock. A sudden shiver raced down Arlo's spine, a strange intuition whispering that this object was far more than a forgotten piece of jewelry. That night, back inside the familiar confines of his toll booth, the atmosphere felt noticeably heavier, charged with an electric tension that made the hairs on his arms stand up. As the dashboard clock clicked to 11:55 p.m., he reached for the radio dial, but even before his fingers could touch the plastic knob, the speakers erupted with a fierce, crackling volume. The static was different tonight, louder, deeper, vibrating through the small booth like a living pulse. When the automated voice finally began its introduction, the tone sounded strangely strained, devoid of its usual pristine calmness. Arlo leaned forward, clutching the golden watch tightly in his palm, as he realized the signal wasn't coming from some distant corporate broadcasting tower, but from a hidden corner right here in his own backyard. The realization that the mysterious broadcast originated from somewhere nearby sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through Arlo's veins, shattering the numbness that had encased him for months. It was a miserable Tuesday night, the rain morphing into a torrential downpour that blurred the headlights of the few brave vehicles passing through his lane. Arlo sat with his lukewarm coffee cooling on the counter, his eyes locked onto the digital clock as it finally shifted its glowing green numbers to midnight. The radio speakers popped fiercely, and the familiar, elegant voice cut through the roaring storm with chilling clarity. "We regret to announce the departure of Maya Lin." Arlo froze, his breath catching painfully in his throat as the coffee cup slipped from his fingers, splashing dark liquid across the concrete floor. Maya Lin was not a stranger, nor was she a name from a distant town. She was the vibrant, cheerful soul who worked at the bakery just 3 blocks away from his house. Only 4 hours prior, Arlo had stood at her counter, receiving a warm paper bag of blueberry muffins, along with her usual radiant, dimpled smile that always bravely brightened his dark afternoons. The radio voice continued its list, but Arlo heard nothing else, the world spinning around him as a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. His mind raced frantically against the impossible reality of what he had just heard, trying to find a logical explanation for why a girl so full of life was being claimed by the dead. He stared at the static-filled speaker, a horrible dread sinking into his stomach as he realized the neat boundaries of his quiet world had just been irrevocably destroyed. The terrifying implication of that broadcast left Arlo completely sleepless, forcing him to abandon his bed the moment the first pale rays of Wednesday morning pierced through his blinds. He sprinted toward the town square, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, fully expecting to find the local bakery dark, locked, and surrounded by weeping family members. Instead, as he rounded the corner, the sweet, comforting scent of fresh cinnamon and toasted sugar wafted through the crisp morning air, completely defying his worst fears. Through the large glass window, Arlo saw Maya, wearing her signature bright yellow apron, humming a cheerful melody while wiping down the glossy wooden tables. She looked entirely vibrant, her cheeks flushed with health as she shared a laugh with an elderly customer who was purchasing a loaf of sourdough bread. Arlo stood paralyzed on the sidewalk, the contrast between the radio's grim announcement and this peaceful scene making him feel like he was losing his mind. Did the mysterious frequency finally commit a terrible error? Or was there an even more sinister explanation lurking behind the automated voice? He stepped inside, the little brass bell above the door chiming merrily, but when Maya looked up and offered her usual enthusiastic greeting, Arlo's voice completely failed him. He stood there, pale and trembling, looking at her as if she were a ghost that hadn't realized it was dead yet. Noticing his alarming expression, Maya's smile slowly faltered, her brow furrowing with genuine concern as Arlo turned on his heel and fled back into the safety of the chilly, misty street. This bizarre encounter haunted Maya for the rest of her shift, prompting her to seek out the strange, pale toll booth worker later that afternoon, when she spotted him sitting on a park bench outside the public library. She approached him quietly, her bright yellow raincoat standing out against the gray, overcast sky, a playful yet curious smirk gracing her lips. "You look like you've seen an actual ghost, Arlo Vance," she said softly, sitting on the opposite end of the bench while adjusting her canvas tote bag. Arlo looked up, the sheer weight of the secret pressing heavily against his conscience, until he simply couldn't contain the truth any longer. In a hurried, whispered rush of words, he confessed everything: the phantom frequency at 104.7 FM, the nightly list of the departed, and the horrifying fact that her name had echoed through his speakers at midnight. Maya blinked in surprise, a nervous laugh escaping her lips as she shook her head, clearly believing he was playing a highly inappropriate, elaborate prank on her. "That's a pretty dark story, even for a guy who works the night shift," she replied, her voice tinged with a slight edge of defensive skepticism. Arlo didn't blink. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notepad, and read aloud the exact date, time, and full name of Maya's grandmother who had passed away 3 years ago. Maya's amusement instantly vanished, the color draining from her face, as she realized that specific information had never been published in the local newspaper, leaving her trapped in a sudden, terrifying reality. The sudden, heavy silence that fell between them on the park bench felt colder than the autumn wind rustling the dying leaves overhead. Maya stared at Arlo, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped her yellow raincoat tighter around her frame, the truth of his words sinking deep into her soul. She looked down at her fingers, confessing in a quiet, fragile voice that for the past week she had been overwhelmed by an inexplicable, crushing exhaustion, as if her energy were leaking into the earth. Arlo's mind clicked into a terrifying gears of logic. The midnight broadcast hadn't announced a past tragedy, nor was it a mistake. It was an explicit prediction of what was to come. With a sense of rising panic, they realized the specific broadcast Arlo had intercepted belonged to the upcoming Friday midnight, leaving them with less than 3 agonizing days to alter the course of destiny. The sheer absurdity of the situation battled against their human logic, yet the fading warmth in Maya's hands was an undeniable proof they couldn't ignore. Arlo felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't experienced since Clara's disappearance, a fierce determination to not let another light get snuffed out on his watch. They sat together under the gray sky, drawing up a frantic plan to hunt down the elusive signal before the countdown reached its final, fateful second. The boundary between sanity and the supernatural had completely dissolved, forcing them to trust each other blindly as they prepared to face a nameless, unseen force that claimed to hold the ledger of life and death. This newfound alliance transformed their fear into a desperate, focused energy as Thursday morning arrived with a thick, suffocating fog that swallowed the streets of Whispering Pines. Armed with Arlo's vintage transistor radio and a makeshift antenna extension, the duo spent hours tracking the intensity of the static, watching the signal bars fluctuate as they moved through the town. The erratic static guided them away from the crowded residential areas, leading them straight toward the highest, most isolated hill on the northern edge of the valley. Perched atop the rocky incline stood the town's abandoned Victorian clock tower, a crumbling brick monolith that had been locked and forgotten since the late 1950s. They forced open the rusted iron side door, stepping into a cavernous interior where dust motes swirled like galaxies in the narrow beams of light piercing the cracked windows. As they climbed the creaking spiral staircase, the static on the radio grew into a deafening rhythmic hum that vibrated through the wooden steps beneath their feet. Reaching the main observatory room, they didn't find cobwebs or collapsed timbers, but rather a pristine, glowing sanctuary filled with thousands of old vinyl records organized in neat wooden crates. In the center of the room sat an archaic, massive broadcasting console, its vacuum tubes glowing with a fierce amber light, operating entirely on its own power, without a single human technician in sight. The automated clicking of the massive console echoed through the dusty room like a mechanical heartbeat, drawing Maya and Arlo closer to its glowing interface. Maya's eyes scanned the complex array of dials until they rested upon a heavy, leather-bound ledger resting on a brass pedestal beside the microphone. With a trembling hand, she turned the thick parchment pages, her breath catching as she found the section dedicated to the current year, written in a strange, shimmering silver ink. There, near the bottom of the page, her own name stood out with terrifying neatness. Maya Lin, Friday, 12 a.m., the ink faintly pulsing as if it were alive. Arlo leaned over her shoulder, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces as his gaze drifted just a few lines above Maya's name to an entry from 12 months ago. Clara Vance, October 14th, 12 a.m., stared back at him, providing the brutal, undeniable confirmation that his sister hadn't simply run away to start a new life. The radio had claimed her too, capturing her essence within this metallic cage and leaving Arlo to realize that his entire year of hopeful waiting had been a tragic delusion. Tears pricked his eyes, a mixture of profound grief for his past and an intense, burning fury for the present, threatening to overwhelm his senses. Maya reached out, her warm fingers squeezing his hand in a silent gesture of shared sorrow, anchoring him before the dark waves of despair could pull him under completely. The profound weight of their discovery hung heavily in the air as Arlo struggled to separate his burning desire for revenge from the cold reality of their situation. He reached toward the console, his fingers wrapping around a heavy iron lever, determined to smash the vacuum tubes and silence the phantom frequency once and for all. "Wait, Arlo, look at this," Maya interrupted urgently, her finger pointing to a brass plaque bolted beneath the main microphone system. It contained a neatly engraved journal entry from the station's original, long-dead founder, warning future finders of the cosmic balance required to maintain the transmission. The inscription read, "The radio does not cause the end, it merely honors the transition. To force a closure of the frequency without a proper balance will cause the clock of the entire valley to freeze forever." Arlo's hand hesitated in midair, his logical mind wrestling violently with the emotional desperation screaming inside his chest. If he destroyed the machine to save Maya, he risked plunging his entire hometown including his grieving mother and innocent neighbors, into a perpetual, timeless purgatory. Maya looked at him, her eyes reflecting a profound maturity that defied her young age, silently pleading with him not to make a reckless choice that would endanger others. They stood caught in a terrible, impossible paradox, torn between the preservation of one precious life and the safety of the entire world they knew. The agonizing dilemma followed them back into the valley as Thursday night faded into the high-stakes reality of Friday morning, the final 24 hours beginning their relentless countdown. Maya's physical condition worsened noticeably with each passing hour, her steps growing heavier and her reflection in the bakery windows appearing strangely translucent, like a fading watercolor painting. Despite the terrifying shift, she refused to spend her remaining time hiding in fear. Instead, she embarked on a quiet, beautiful mission through the town. Arlo walked beside her as she visited her favorite spots, watching her hand out free pastries to the neighborhood children and leave a bouquet of fresh daisies on her mother's kitchen counter. She was saying her subtle, heartbreaking goodbyes without uttering a single word of tragedy, ensuring that her final memories in Whispering Pines would be woven out of love rather than panic. Arlo watched her incredible bravery, a profound admiration blooming amidst his deep sorrow, realizing that this remarkable girl had managed to bring vibrant color back into his gray world in just a few short days. He couldn't shake the feeling that meeting her wasn't a cruel twist of fate, but a second chance at salvation, a chance to finally save someone when he had been completely helpless to save his own sister. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valley, Arlo knew he would rather face the end of time itself than let Maya become just another cold name read into the midnight static. This fierce determination ignited a fiery argument between them as they climbed the hill back toward the clock tower under a dark sky flashing with distant, ominous lightning. Arlo pulled the golden pocket watch from his jacket, explaining his frantic plan to wedge the mechanical device directly into the console's primary gear system to force a temporary transmission delay. If we can just pause the signal for a few seconds at midnight, the transition window will close and the ledger will have to bypass your name, he shouted over the rising wind. Maya stopped on the rocky path, turning to face him with tears welling in eyes, her yellow raincoat whipping violently around her knees. And what if the founder's warning is true, Arlo? What if you freeze the hearts of everyone in the valley just to satisfy your own inability to let go? She cried out, her voice cracking with deep emotion. She argued that sacrificing the safety of hundreds of innocent people for her survival was a selfish act, one that would taint whatever life she had left with unbearable guilt. They stood in the pouring rain, a heartbreaking confrontation of values and love clashing against the backdrop of the rumbling storm. You can't spend your entire existence mourning the living, Arlo. Sometimes loving someone means accepting that you cannot control the clock, she screamed, her words cutting deeper than any physical blow ever could. The echo of her painful words eventually dissolved into the steady, rhythmic downpour as they finally entered the sanctuary of the clock tower, the digital hands of the dashboard clock reading 11:50 p.m. The storm outside raged with a furious intensity, rattling the old wooden window frames and sending cool drafts of air whistling through the record crates. Inside, the massive console was humming at a fever pitch, its amber vacuum tubes glowing so brightly they cast long, dancing shadows across the leather-bound ledger. Maya sat quietly on a wooden stool near the microphone, her hands resting in her lap, looking completely at peace with whatever destiny awaited her. Arlo knelt beside her, his previous anger completely melting away into a deep, hollow sorrow as he gently took her hand, noting with a pang of grief how cool her skin had become. "Thank you for listening for me, Arlo," she whispered softly, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips as a tear slipped down her pale cheek. "Even if my name is called, I'm glad it was you who heard it, because I know you will remember me with joy, not just sadness." Arlo squeezed her hand tightly, his own tears falling onto the glass face of Clara's golden pocket watch, refusing to accept that this beautiful soul was about to be reduced to mere audio waves. The final, agonizing minute arrived like a crashing wave, the internal mechanisms of the tower clock groaning as the heavy gears prepared to strike the midnight hour. The radio console popped loudly, the familiar, serene automated voice cutting through the static with a chilling, mechanical perfection. "We regret to announce the departure of." Arlo looked at Maya, seeing her eyes gently close, as her form began to ripple like a reflection on disturbed water, her grip on his hand loosening. Driven by a pure, overwhelming surge of love and absolute refusal to lose another person, Arlo bypassed his doubts, raised the golden pocket watch, and slammed it directly into the exposed main gear of the console. The metal teeth of the watch ground violently against the broadcasting gears, emitting a sharp, metallic screech that echoed through the cavernous room. Time itself didn't freeze for the valley below, but within the confines of the tower, the silver ink on the parchment ledger began to vibrate and blur frantically. The amber vacuum tube suddenly flared into a blinding, warm golden illumination, a brilliant wave of energy erupting from the console that knocked Arlo backward onto the wooden floorboards, swallowing the room in pure light. The blinding radiance slowly receded, leaving behind a profound, heavy silence that was completely devoid of the radio's automated transmission or the crackle of white noise. Arlo lay on the floor for a terrifying second, his heart hammering against his ribs as he forced his eyes open, dreading what he might see. He scrambled to his feet, his gaze darting instantly toward the wooden stool where Maya had been sitting just moments before. To his profound relief, Maya was still there, her eyes wide with astonishment as she looked down at her own hands, which were now glowing with a healthy, vibrant warmth. The strange, translucent quality of her skin had vanished completely, replaced by the solid, undeniable reality of a living person who had survived the midnight hour. Arlo rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her in a fierce, emotional embrace, feeling the steady, reassuring thumping of her heart against his chest. They looked over at the ledger on the pedestal. The silver ink that had once spelled Maya Lin had completely dissolved, leaving behind a perfectly blank space on the parchment paper. They had successfully challenged the cold logic of the machine, earning a miracle through sheer determination and love. However, the joyful celebration was short-lived, as the dawn of Saturday morning brought a strange, unsettling atmosphere over the Valley of Whispering Pines. Without the nightly broadcast to honor those who passed away naturally, a heavy, unmoored silence hung over the community, as if the emotional gears of the town had lost their track. People walked through the streets with a sense of vague confusion, unable to find closure for their private losses, their grief lingering in the air like an invisible, suffocating fog. Arlo and Maya realized that while they had saved one life, the complete destruction of the frequency had broken a vital spiritual bridge for everyone else. The station itself was not inherently evil. It was a necessary monument that allowed the living to acknowledge and release the souls of those who had departed. The machine was cold because it had no soul driving it, Arlo, Maya noted softly as they stood in the silent tower, looking at the broken gears and the jammed golden pocket watch. They understood that the station must continue to exist, but it no longer had to be a place of dread and automated sorrow. It needed a human heart to guide its waves. This profound realization sparked a new sense of purpose within Arlo, transforming his old grief into a creative drive to heal the town he had almost broken. Working together through the night, he and Maya carefully repaired the console, integrating the inner mechanisms of Clara's golden pocket watch directly into the broadcasting circuit. Instead of forcing a mechanical countdown, the watch now acted as a filter, softening the harsh static and infusing the machinery with a warm, steady energy. Arlo stepped up to the microphone, no longer a fearful boy hiding in a toll booth, but a courageous young man ready to accept his role as the station's caretaker. Maya stood firmly by his side, her hand resting supportively on his shoulder as he flipped the primary switch, sending a brand new signal out into the valley. They were not going to announce endings anymore. They were going to transform the frequency into a space of beautiful remembrance. As the vacancy on the radio dial filled with a gentle, melodic hum, Arlo took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying a warmth that Whispering Pines hadn't heard in a very long time. The transformation of 104.7 FM was immediate and extraordinary, shifting its broadcast from the dead of midnight to a comforting evening slot known to everyone as the Remembrance Hour. No longer did a cold, automated voice rattle off a terrifying list of names into a dark abyss of white noise and loneliness. Instead, Arlo and Maya sat behind the glowing console every evening, playing beautiful, soaring acoustic melodies interspersed with the real, vibrant stories of the people who had passed away. Callers from all over the valley began tuning in, sharing funny anecdotes, favorite recipes, and beautiful memories of their lost loved ones, turning the station into a living archive of joy. The heavy, suffocating fog of grief that had plagued Whispering Pines for years began to dissipate, replaced by a communal celebration of lives well lived. The station became a beacon of light, proving to the entire community that an ending did not mean a person had to be forgotten in the dark. Arlo listened to each story with a profound sense of peace, realizing that his long nights in the toll booth had finally led him to a place where he could heal others. This beautiful new tradition finally gave Arlo the courage to face the ultimate ghost lingering within his own heart during a special, quiet Sunday evening broadcast. As the gentle piano music played softly in the background, Arlo adjusted the microphone, his eyes catching Maya's encouraging nod from across the wooden console table. He took a deep breath, his voice steady yet filled with a profound emotion as he spoke his sister Clara's name into the airwaves for the very first time. He didn't speak of her disappearance with tears of despair or anger, but instead shared a beautiful story of how she used to paint the autumn leaves using vibrant oranges and deep purples. Through the power of the microphone, Arlo finally found the elusive closure he had locked away inside his chest for an entire agonizing year, releasing his grief into the melody. He felt a literal weight lifting from his soul, knowing that letting her go did not mean forgetting her, but rather keeping her love alive in the light of day. As the broadcast ended, he knew that Clara's story was finally complete, preserved beautifully in the hearts of those who loved her. The golden light of a perfect Sunday afternoon bathed the valley of Whispering Pines in a warmth it hadn't seen in years, as if the town itself had finally taken a long, deep breath. The suffocating gray mist that once defined Arlo's world was completely gone, replaced by a brilliant blue sky that mirrored the newfound clarity in his heart. Arlo and Maya walked hand in hand through the bustling town square, watching life move forward in a beautiful, uninterrupted symphony. From the open windows of the local bakery, the porch radios of cozy suburban homes, and the dashboards of passing cars, the gentle melodies of 104.7 FM played softly in the background, a permanent and comforting heartbeat for the community. They had transformed a monument of fear into a sanctuary of hope, proving that the shadows of yesterday have no power over the light of today when faced with courage. Arlo looked down at the golden pocket watch in his hand, its gears now ticking perfectly, no longer frozen at midnight, but moving steadily forward toward the future. The profound moral of their journey echoed through every note broadcasted across the valley. Time is not an enemy to be feared, nor is grief a prison to live in, but rather, every single second is a precious gift meant to be cherished with the people we love. We cannot control the hands of the clock, nor can we rewrite the chapters that have already been read, but we hold the power to choose how we honor the pages that remain. Arlo squeezed Maya's hand tightly, a radiant, genuine smile gracing his face as he realized that by bravely letting go of the past, he had finally opened his arms to the beautiful reality of being alive.